Auzubillahiminash-shaytanir-rajim. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. This is me, Alisha Abid. So today we are going to discuss about the central processing unit, the CPU. So there are some features of the CPU. This is microprocessor, and this is a chip and the processor. So what is CPU? Actually, the CPU is a portion of the computer system that carries out the instructions of the computer program to So here I'm going to discuss the brief history of CPU. CPU history starts in 1971 when Intel from the first time, and there are the functions of CPU. CPU receives information from input devices and keep them in memory. It processes the input information. So here are the units of CPU. As maybe you know or you don't know, so there are three units of CPU: arithmetic. There is explanation of ALU, CU and MU. This unit performs arithmetic and logic operations. Arithmetic system calculated, add, subtract. So important fact: the CPU is a small square unit that sits behind the fan. The fan keeps the CPU from overheating. So here this is the picture of slide of inner side of the CPU. So here the DVD burner, this is the power supply in CPU. And there are the functions of CPU. CPU receives information from input devices and keep them in memory. It processes the input information. It can different. And this is the new type of CPU, like this is attached with our laptops. So this type of CPU in the laptops or in the computer books. So here we are going to discuss about the CPU registers. So there are so many options and points. Data register is used to be. So here the clock pulses. The CPU is driven by one or more repetitive clock circuits that send a stream of pulses throughout the CPU's circuitry. The CPU there is a data width of the CPU. If the data is 8-bit ALU, then it can add, subtract, multiply, etc. And if two, so this is MIPS, as MIPS stands for million of instructions per second and is rough measure of the CPU speed. So now math coprocessor. Math coprocessors were additional chips. This additional coprocessor allow the hardware for floating point math. There is explanation of ALU, CU and MU. This unit performs arithmetic and logic operations. Arithmetic system calculated, add, subtract. So these are the phases of CPU. There are four phases of CPU operation: the fetch instruction, decode instruction, execute instruction and the results. CPU operation. So here the explanation of fetch instruction and decode instruction. Fetch is dealing with interviewing an instruction from main memory after an instruction is fetched as CPU operations. Execute. After decode steps, the execute step is performed. During this step, various portions of the CPU circuit. A CPU circuit uses a series of pins to connect a CPU's processor to the PC's motherboard. If a CPU is connected, so CPU vendors, as we mostly see the Intel laptops, Intel computers. So this is Surprising, not surprising, but it's okay. Internal system and CPU of Mac Pro. So here is information about Mac Pro. Mac Pro is designed for pros who need the ultimate in CPU's performance. At the heart of this, and thank you so much.